This is Andrew with Drake Custom Bass, and I'm here in the shop today with a new project. Recently, a client has sent me this 7-string lined fretless Benavente neck. I'm not sure if there's a model number. I'm not overly familiar with his work, other than I've had a few come through the shop just for setup, and they're always very, very nicely built instruments. Very beautiful woods, top-notch work all the way around. What the client has asked me to do is figure out a way to get frets, cut the fret lines out and install frets. Looking at the binding, which is wood binding, looks to be like Macassar ebony, I believe. And the light colored, fingerboard of being maple. There are some pitfalls in an operation such as this. I talked to the client quite a bit about this, and we've discussed methods. I mean, there is a method where you take a Dremel and you just Dremel out the line and then install a fret with an overhanging where you cut the tangs off, and that's that's an option. It's very time consuming. I'm not sure that would be easiest for me. That's a lot of running a Dremel for a long period of time, trying to get those out as cleanly as possible. The idea that we're going to be using some vintage gauge, which is smaller, stainless steel wire, I got to be careful that I don't open up these slots way too wide. I want the fret to be able to hold in place because I don't have a press coil that's wide enough to really run a bead of glue, stick a fret into a really sloppy slot there, and then press it down and let it hold. I'm going to have to rig up some methodology for this to make sure the frets are seated and stay seated until the glue dries. So there's some aspects to this. It's going to take some engineering. The easiest, of course, the down and dirty method, is just take a saw and cut all the way through and cut into the binding. Take the fret wire, lay it on there, hammer it in place, trim and dress up the ends, and you'll have the little metal, the tangs showing, all that stuff. We're not doing that method. That would be a little too, I don't know, such a nice neck, and I would not want to wreck it doing that. But I have talked to the client about this, and we've talked it through, and the client loves the bass, loves how it looks, feels, but it will serve him better if it had frets. And I understand that. Instruments to me are like tools, and they're instruments to create music, your art, and if you can't achieve what you want to do with an instrument the way it is, sometimes you do have to make modifications. But we're going to try to make this modification and have it look just as nice as we can possibly make it look. We are going to be slotting through the binding. However, we're not going to just hammer a fret in there and call it good. As I do with bound fretboards, I have a tool that cuts the tang off wire so that when it's installed, the tang stops before the binding and the wire actually overlaps it. I'm going to use this method. However, the slot's going to go all the way through. Now let me move this off to the side because I have a couple necks I can show you. This is a neck that's in production right now. It's in its very rough form. But you can see what that looks like once the fret tangs have been removed and the frets have been hammered in. These have not been trimmed or beveled or anything like that. But you can see there is a gap in the wood. The fortunate thing about the Benavente neck is that it has, for the most part, with the exception of just this one little area of brown wood, has a very dark, like I said, Macassar ebony or something similar wood. So I think that using the method like this, and then let me grab this other neck. This is another Drake 33 scale P conversion neck. But I've done that same method here. And yeah, you can, this wood's lighter. This is rosewood. You could see that there is a little bit of a slot showing. But when the finish hits, when the light hits it, it's really, you don't really see it. This wood is lighter in color than the Macassar ebony that we have on this one. I'm really thinking that I can actually come up with a fill that will look just fine, and then I'll repair the finish over top. So we'll have frets in there, and we won't have an exposed, tang on the fret sticking out, things like that. I think that's the method we're going to use. Like I said, the client has agreed, and so yeah, we're going to get going on that now. I know it's kind of controversial because the client has asked around, and there's been other people suggesting all kinds of methods and things like that, and they all have their cost. I'm able to do all the methods, everything from removing fretboard and putting a new fretboard on, rebinding. I can do all that type of thing. But that's all going to be very expensive. I mean, the option of having a whole new neck made, that was originally the request I got, and the cost of that is way out of reasonable budget for the client. So, and we don't want to make another neck for the base and then miss out on, I mean, this is beautiful woods with beautiful finish. I'd never be able to copy that. And I just think his base would look really cobbled together if I tried to make a neck to fit it and everything. I do think that the method that we have selected is going to be the best for this. So if you don't agree, that's fine. Go down to the comments and voice your opinions. I have that on occasion where people call in to question what I do. That's fine. That's fine. Have at it. But yeah, I'm going to get set up here, and we're going to start cutting those lines out. Stay tuned. Okay, before I get sawing these lines out, I want to verify that the location of these lines is accurate. It does no good to cut these out, put frets in there if it's off by a certain amount. It may cause intonation issues, things like that. So I have my 35 scale, and I know on the camera it may not line up, but I'm checking it, looking at it in person here. Yeah, this scale is right. Where these lines are is where the fret should be. So we're out of woods on that. That's going to work out just fine. So I'm going to go and get my saw, and I have a little saw that I have purchased that is actually really good about cutting these out. I don't need to go that deep because my fret wire doesn't have a real deep tang or anything like that. So we're not going to actually be getting too much into the wood. And since there is a radius here, I don't need to be as deep on the outside. So I'm going to be as careful with it and just kind of sneak up on each one because I don't want to remove any more of this binding wood than I have to. I am going to probably run some tape along on the outside because that's a pole saw. I might run tape along here just so that when I pull, if it does pull out some wood, I can glue it back in. I don't want to chip out here and cause more work later on. Okay, this is a saw I've chosen. And I bought this one, and you can see it's not super big because an actual fret slotting saw, the bigger ones I have, are a little bit cumbersome, and I got to be very, very careful with this. I've kind of debated whether or not I should go over this with an X-Acto knife first, and I might do that on one just to see how that goes. I've done that before, but there's been times where I didn't need to. In this case, I'm not really sure what the filler wood is in the line. I'm assuming the grain's going side to side. But yeah, I might try the first one, scoring it with an X-Acto knife first. The other thing to note is I'm pulling, this is a pole saw, because I may go back and forth, but it really only is cutting when I'm pulling it this way. I have the tape here to keep any splintering from the ebony binding from popping out. If it does, I'll be able to capture that and get that glued back in. Let's just see how this actually cuts here, because it doesn't take much of an impression into the wood to get the saw to, for the first pass, to kind of cut a little channel. And once I get that established, then the saw should cooperate. And I just don't want to slip and put a big deep scratch, because this is maple fingerboard. It will show everything. So a little patience. And once I get going on this, I'm going to shut the camera off, put some soft music on, and just kind of let the hours flow away because this is going to take a lot of concentration to do this and have this nice and clean. All right, so I can kind of feel, I think I'm going to kind of somewhat angle the blade in here a little bit. To establish a little bit of a channel for my saw blade to key on. Okay. For those who are really opposed to this method, you might want to look away. So far, so good. Yeah, that's going to work just fine. I'm just going to pull one way, I think. I'll just sneak up on the depth. Gotta make sure I clean my saw on a regular basis. Yeah, that's going to work just fine. And incidentally, I have a little gauge, and I can look up, just hold a piece of fret wire up to it, and I know which of these lines I need to go depth-wise. So I'm actually almost there. I will go a little bit deeper, but again, this is very small wire that we're going to be using, so the depth, let's see if I can get to the end here. get it into some focus. The tang is actually below this double line here, and in the center, that double line's already, yeah, the slot's already deep enough that I could probably get the fret in there. I'm going to make sure it's clean enough. You gotta be careful when I wedge things in there that I don't pull out some wood. It is beneficial that we're using maple, that this particular flat sawn maple probably isn't as chippy as some ebonies and rosewoods might be. So I'm going to take the camera off the mount and I'll show you what it looks like on the base side. Stand by. Okay, so that's the slot. That's what it's going to look like all the way down the fingerboard. It's not very deep, and I think that's going to look fine. I'll be able to mix up some kind of fill, probably using Macassar ebony dust. I do have some brown Macassar ebony that I can get some dust from for the area down here where the wood turns a little bit more brown. But even so, even if I just used black ebony, I don't think that would really be so unsightly that it would be distracting to the client. I would be fine with that on my own personal base, but I'd understand if others don't look at it that way. So anyway, we're going to continue on here. I've only got, 23 more to go. Okay, we're going to have to, now that I have the slots cut, we're going to have to dress up the top, the face of the fingerboard here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the truss rod cover, and I have to get the nut off of there so we don't scratch it up. And since this was a fretless instrument and we're converting it into a fretted instrument, I might have to glue a strip underneath this brass nut for it to go back on to get the height we need for when the frets are on there. So fret slots are all cut and they're largely clean. There was some that got a little bit wide, but everything's going to be fine. The fret's going to cover all that. Everything was right on the line. We didn't get too carried away, too deep. I believe I'm going to be able to dress those ends up with some fill and make it look like this never happened. So I'm going to go out and get my sanding block. The radius back here is almost perfectly flat. It's not quite, but the least amount of radius that I have of blocks is 20, which 20 has a gap in the middle when I set my gauge on there. So this is somewhat flatter than that. So what I'm going to do is just have to do the method where you just lightly sand the entire face. And we're not removing much material, but I do want a nice true, cleaned up top here. And there's a little puckering from where the saw took out those lines. Those lines, incidentally, turned out to be some kind of a plastic, I believe. It wasn't wood. It was a little bit hard to saw some of it out, but it did come out. And so I think we're sitting good. Little three-sided file. I'm using that to open up the slots just a little bit. This will help the frets go in and seat nice and tight down to the wood. And before I put the hard wax oil on, I'll probably do a couple coats because I want it to be thick enough that it's not easily worn through. Before I do that, I'm putting a very thin application of shellac. And what this will do is not only seal off the Macassar ebony, which the resins would make the hard wax oil, it would kind of impede the curing process. But what I find is a very thin application, not enough to really build on the surface, But just a little application of shellac brings out all the details in maple. It makes it a little bit nicer looking, more interesting. Yeah, you can see how that shellac really brought out some curl in the wood. Yeah, it's going to be good. Okay, now that the hard wax oil I've applied to the face of the fretboard is cured now, I'm back using my little saw-like tool, and I'm cleaning any wax that got into the fret slot. I'm trying to do this without slipping and scratching because I do not want to have to replace finish. And in prep of gluing in these frets, I'm just going to put a very light beeswax mixture I have over the finish that I've applied, and this will come right off with some naphtha or something like that. And this is mainly just to keep the super glue that I'm going to use from really sticking to this finish. So I cut the fret to length. I don't like to waste wire if I don't have to. There's always going to be a little pointed end where I've cut it with my cutters, and I just make sure that it's about even on both sides. Then the next step. So the next step is to trim the underside of the tang, and I use this crimping tool to do that. And no matter how good the tool is, if I can get it to focus there, there's always kind of a ragged edge and a burr that has to be removed here. It's a bit time consuming, but this makes, when the fret ends are trimmed and polished and everything, it just makes it look a lot more professional. Okay, we're ready to apply some glue. Make sure the tip is clear. Lovely. And I do one last quick check of the fret to make sure there's nothing I missed. And I make sure that it's even from side to side. There's just enough overhang that I can trim off. A little light tap to get started. This is such small fret wire. It doesn't take a lot of force to get it in. Okay, the frets are all in. I didn't really have any problems come up during the installation process. So I'm just going to trim off the ends. I'll let the glue stand a little bit longer before I go to bevel and dress up the ends of the frets. Using my little file to bevel off all the sharp ends. And I am putting a bit of a roll to this fingerboard, since I'm going to have to repair some finish anyway along just the the binding, not on the back part of the neck. I'm just going to go ahead and roll things in. I think it's more comfortable for the player when it's not a sharp edge. There seems to be the spacing and everything. There's enough real estate left on the fretboard for the strings. I think the strings lay pretty deep inside, so I don't have to worry about that as much. And so the next step, I'm going to mix up some, I guess it'd be filler. It's actually Timbermate water-based wood filler, and it's the stuff that's in the real dark color. I think it's supposed to be walnut. It's a little bit too dark for that, but it's also the type that once I get it in there and it dries, if it's light colored, I can go back with a tiny brush and hit with a little bit of dye and match the color of the binding. So that's what I'm going to do right now. What I do like about this stuff, it's since it is water-based, it won't really, it's easy to wipe off with just a damp cloth. So I can get a little sloppy here without too big of a fear. It doesn't stain my fingers or anything, so sometimes I use my fingers to actually make sure I get it packed way down in there. And like I said, I can go back with a damp cloth and completely wipe the excess off. And it might take me a couple applications of this to get all these filled. Alright, now to seal all this in, I'm going to just use a little shellac and just do a real simple wipe. And this mostly is to seal the Macassar ebony so that I can actually apply some oil wax over top. As you can see so far, those slots are somewhat disappeared. When the light hits them just right, you can kind of see where they're at. But I'm not done yet. I will be applying some hard wax oil, and that should make that all go away. Because I'm going to have to tape this all up so I don't scratch up the fingerboard doing the polishing and leveling and all that. But before I do that, I'm going to have to very carefully, with my safe edge file, go and trim, like many of you have seen me do before. There's always a little bit of a burr where the bevel on these frets is. And so what I'm going to try to do here is just take that sharp little corner off. Because once I get the tape on there, I may not have as much access to that. Now flipping my file over, I'm going to dress these ends real lightly here. Strip the tape along here like this first, and then go back to mask off around the frets. Then it's easy when I'm done to pull this up, and then it peels all the tape off, and a lot easier method than each individual piece of tape being pulled off. I guess I should mention that before I put any tape on here, I adjust the two truss rods to make sure that we're nice and flat, that this neck doesn't have an up bow or a back bow in it. I'm going to use a blue Sharpie to color the tops of the frets, because I don't have a radius block that's either A, flat enough for this particular neck, or B, wide enough. So I'm going to have to use a method with just a precision block with some sandpaper on it to take the tops off the frets, make sure we're all exactly level. And I just have my aluminum bar with some 600 grit. And I'm just going to glide this back and forth over the frets until I see all of the blue Sharpie disappear. This is actually a sharpening steel. And I often use it to remove the scratches from the sanding abrasives. As we want this to play as clean as possible with low action if that's what's desired. Buffing compound. Get all this tape off of here. And we're going to hit this edge with a little bit of denatured alcohol. Clean off any residue or resins that might have bled out of the wood. And we're going to follow that up with some thin viscosity super glue. And now that the glue is cured, I'm going to go back and hit these the edge of this fretboard with 2000 abrasive pad. In case there's any brush strokes from the super glue. And now wiping the edge with naphtha. This just cleans off, prepares for the hard wax oil. And for the next step, this is the hard wax oil I use, so there's no mystery. And it's the 3011 gloss. It's not going to need much. I will do 2 coats. I'll let this one dry off and then I'll apply 1 more coat and then we'll call that good. Applying a little of my beeswax and a mineral oil mixture. Okay, I think we did pretty good on this. One last little thing. I know I keep saying that, but I have to install this nut. And since this was aligned fretless prior to this modification, then the frets are now more than likely going to be too high to utilize the nut as it is, because once the strings are in the slots, they'll just be resting on top of the frets. So what I'm going to do is build up underneath the nut here. I have some Macassar ebony veneer, and I'm going to build up a little wood underneath this thing before I put it into the slot there. So I think everything went really clean. I didn't have any problem sealing and hiding those slots from cutting the lines out. I'd say on the treble side, I'm probably 95% where you can't see them. On the bass side, I'd go as far as 98%. I don't see anything along there that the client's going to think is unsightly, and I'm just really excited for him. I hope that when he gets his back and gets the tuners put on and it's installed onto his bass, and he starts playing on it, that he's going to be really, really happy. I have no reason to doubt that he will be. He might have to have his tech. I think I mentioned that before. He might have to have his tech either knock the nut off and take some more off the shim, or file the slots to taste. Some guys get away with really, really low action. Some guys need a little bit more depending on how heavy they play. But yeah, everything, the only concerns I really had was, pulling a saw along that line without slipping and really messing up the fingerboard. Maple is really not a very forgiving wood. If you slip with a saw, it will scratch, and you'll have to remove a lot of wood to hide that. And as you saw, I only demonstrated a couple frets before I shut the camera off and just concentrated on cutting those lines out. It turns out the material in the lines was not wood. It was some kind of a plastic. Made it a little bit more difficult, but we powered through it. The only other issue I found is, since, some at the widest point, this is over 4 inches. And hammering a fret in, usually, I apply some glue. You've seen me do that before. And then I hammer the fret in, and then I use a caul or a press of some sort to clamp everything down that matches the radius and everything to hold the fret wire in place while the glue dries. With a neck like this, that's just not possible, at least not in my little shop. So once again, we had to, just each fret I had to really, really take my time with and make sure everything was cut right, trimmed right, and fit before I applied glue and things like that. So anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing back from the client once he has this neck installed on his bass with the tuners and some strings, and see what he thinks. I think he's going to be really happy and all that, but so time will tell. Anyway, this has been Andrew with Drake Custom Bass. If you enjoyed the video, please do us a big favor and hit that like and subscribe button. We do appreciate that. And yeah, I'm going to get back to work. I have a few more videos that we're going to be working on here coming up in the very near future. So check back often.